Hiya. How are we all today? Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I am Sneakrcet, and I'm happy to be hosting you for tonight's show. Normal Island is the live show where we try to highlight the stories that may not make it into legacy media headlines, but also provide a progressive perspective on those stories. So, if you're joining us for the first time and you think that we're biased, it's because we are. We've had that comment a couple of times, so just wanted to be clear. Tonight it's our last Normal Island show of the week, but as always, we will be back on Sunday for the debrief. So let us know what you'd like to see covered in that show by messaging us at Turn Left Media on Twitter. You can also keep up with us over on TikTok and Instagram as Turn Left Media as well. So, what do we have on the cards for tonight? Boris Johnson has called for a referendum on the UK, leaving the ECHR. We'll be having a quick look into that. We'll be talking about the assisted dying vote. MPs are going to be getting the first vote on assisted dying for 9 years, but we'll be talking about why now. From there, we'll be speaking about the United Kingdom returning the Chagos Islands-ish, giving back sovereignty to Mauritius, with the exception of a few key parts that we'll be speaking on. Complicity and Confessions, we will be looking at Al Jazeera's latest investigative documentary, which has shown both the IDF documenting their own war crimes and raised more questions about the UK's complicity. Finally, we're going to be wrapping up tonight to talking about the Conservative praise for Wes Streeting's plans for the NHS. And we'll be looking a little bit further into the Toryfication of the Labour government's plan for UK healthcare. As we go through to the stories tonight, I'm pleased to be joined by the wonderful Maya, aka Barbie Advocates over on TikTok. Maya is an accessibility and inclusion specialist who uses her platform to try and create accessible public health, political, and social policy content. She also provides practical advice to help disabled people uphold their rights and advocates for the eradication of health inequality. Maya, thank you for joining us today. I am looking forward to getting your thoughts on our stories tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And also, everybody, this is Maya's live debut. So please give a lot of love in the chat. Really excited to have her joining us. But thank you, Maya. And yeah, everybody, please give a big warm welcome. Now, before we jump in tonight, I do just want to say a huge, huge thank you to everybody who's joined our community over the last few months, either as a Patreon supporter or through YouTube membership. Turn Left is a growing platform, but we're all still voluntary, whether we're hosting, whether we're guesting, whether we're producing. Everybody who joins the show or plays any part in it is doing it because we care about bringing these stories and these voices to you. So anytime you are able to support, it could be through becoming a member, it could be supporting us over at turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, or it could be something as simple as sharing this stream, following us on our socials, reposting things, helping us get up in the algorithm. Everything is appreciated. So thank you very much again. Okay, if everybody's ready, we're going to do a deep breath and we're going to get into the headlines. So, Boris Johnson's back in the news. He has shared his position on the European Court of Human Rights today, telling the Daily Telegraph that he thinks that there is a strong case for a referendum on the UK being part of the European Court of Human Rights. On a completely unrelated note, Boris is also promoting his new memoir. But does he have a point? Is the European Court of Human Rights stopping us from reaching our full potential? No. Of course he doesn't. He just wants to promote his book. But I might be wrong. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maya, what do you think? Do you think he's got a point here?
I think a lot of the reason they want us to leave the ECHR is because of migration, but you cannot stop migration, especially through deregulation, which I think is the main reason people want us out of the ECHR, so that we can deregulate. And if you deregulate workers' rights, that doesn't make workers more productive. And deregulation also doesn't improve standards of living. So I think actually the more that we talk about this whole leaving the ECHR thing, it's not going to happen under Labour, but the more we talk about it, it almost gives it it makes it a valid talking point when like every sane person thinks it's an insane concept to leave the ECHR.
Yeah, we're pushing it into the Overton window. He's got a habit of throwing these referendums out there with devastating consequences. I feel like maybe he had a book. I don't know if he had a book to present to promote last time ahead of Brexit, but it's good that we're all on the same page. So with that in mind, we're going to throw that non-story right away, and we're going to move on to the next thing. MPs are going to be getting their first vote on assisted dying in 9 years. So the Labour MP for Spen Valley, Kim Ledbetter, has introduced a bill to Parliament this week that would give terminally ill patients the right to choose to end their lives. This is the first time since MPs voted against a similar bill in 2015 that the issue has been brought back into Parliament. And it follows on from a promise made by Keir Starmer to allow a new vote on the issue where MPs could vote with their conscience. It's called a free vote. There'll be no party whip holding anything against them from that side. Kim has said that the time is now for the vote. However, there have also been a number of criticisms that the bill could lead to a slippery slope in terms of the right to choose. Responding to these comments, Kim said that wherever a law has been introduced in other countries and it's got strict limited criteria with proper safeguards and protections, it hasn't been widened. So there's a perception that that's the case, but it isn't the case. Where there are countries where the law is broader, that was always how it started. So I think there's a perception around this slippery slope concept, which actually isn't reality. Now, Maya, this is a topic with a lot of nuance in terms of the readiness of the healthcare system to introduce something like this. Do you feel like the time is now for this kind of bill?
I would like to kindly tell Kim to look at Canada, which have sought to expand the criteria of which you are eligible to enter kind of this assisted dying scheme, which is called MAID in Canada. They have expanded it. And in fact, there was a case where a man who his only cited condition was having hearing loss was the sole list on the criteria of the reason he wanted to end his life. And he was granted assisted death in Canada because they loosened some of the requirements around it. We have had instances where veterans who have requested adaptations to their house because of disability have, instead of being given those adaptations, have been referred to MAID, the assisted dying scheme in Canada. They have put the brakes on opening it up to people with mental ill health because it is too difficult to ascertain when somebody's basically irremediably mentally unwell.
Yeah.
But also you have to, it only works if people are given more options in end of life care, not less. And too often end of life care could, like the assisted dying program, could be framed as a way to take the strain off health and social care. It only works if you give people more choice. However, one of the most cited reasons in Canada for people entering the end of life scheme was having basically like having a low standard of living, not finding enjoyment for life, not being fulfilled by their life due to their health conditions.
Right.
That's totally able to be supported from if they're correctly supported by health and social care and with things like housing. If you have people who don't have the right support systems around them, they're going to be more likely to either go of their own will or to feel pressured to go into this. And actually, I don't think we're in a safe place in the UK where we can talk about this because hospices are underfunded in the UK. Most hospices in the UK are charities. They don't receive government funding. So there is an issue with hospice funding, and especially across the UK, how it's a bit of a postcode lottery as to the standard of care you'll receive. So if you then introduce this, oh, well, you can all end your lives early
Just
and
die then.
Then hospices aren't going to get their funding. You're not really treating the problem. And generally I am pro euthanasia, but not now.
Yeah, it's a really tricky line, right? I think one of the issues that was raised was around the idea of that being causing the reduction of funding for palliative care for people who don't wish to end their lives. So essentially putting people into a situation where they feel pressured to, you're either going to have a long drawn out illness and it's going to be horrible and it's not going to be funded and you're going to be considered a burden and there's going to be all these different things. I mean, like that thing about the veteran is absolutely crazy. You want better housing? How about instead you die? That's
Mhm.
crazy. Like it, I mean, it's completely, it's very, very scary, and it does get a little bit dystopian, especially when we've got the likes of Wes Streeting in charge of our health system. I don't know if he's the one that I would trust to safely be providing people with that choice.
I also think that we're too close to the non-consensual DNR scandal that happened during COVID, where
Right.
like we don't know the scope of how many people had these non-consensual do not resuscitate orders put on their files. Uh,
Hmm.
but we know that it happened and it did happen to scale.
Hmm.
That non-consensually withdrawing care, we haven't sorted out why that happened and how those decisions were made until we can have those sort of open and honest conversations. I
Hmm.
don't think we are in a situation that's safe to talk about end of life.
No, no, I don't think so. I think we've got a couple of comments from people who might be sharing some things in the chat in terms of some of the stories here as well. Yeah, Rachel said MAID can be dangerous for impoverished people. I think this ties into what you were saying just now.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about palliative care is to die well and to die in the best, most comfortable position you can be. And, you know, a lot of the time, there's a lot people can do. If we start talking about euthanasia, that capacity is just going to become eroded and people will get pushed into it.
Hmm. Yeah, it becomes, I guess it's one thing in the story of, yeah, I'm going to jump over to Becca's comment here. It's one of these things, if you want the most painless, like most dignified death essentially, but if that results in other options being taken away, so that it's your only option, but it could have been different. Becca said, my gran really wanted to die. She kept going in misery for years. I wouldn't want that at the end. I think that's something a lot of us can relate to as well. And then some of these MPs will be thinking about savings. Exactly. I think that's the fear that we have there.
Exactly. And I think this conversation needs to, like, actually, quite a lot of the hospices have said that, like, they don't want to get involved with this conversation because they are about, like, not prematurely ending life, but making it the best time it can be for an individual.
Hmm.
That if we are not if we are not having this conversation with people who have lived experience of this, and especially with the disabled community and with the carers and people who work in social care, like these people need to be the center of this discussion. It cannot be the Department of Work and Pensions and the Department of Health and Social Care. It needs to be people who have real life experience of this.
Hmm. I think there's a good point just in the chat around this being around assisted dying for people who are terminally ill before their illness makes them suffer. I think that was what we were speaking about a little bit at the beginning in terms of the fear of it sort of snowballing, but also in terms of, I guess, even when we're speaking about terminally ill people, we still have the underfunding of palliative care as well as a result of, like, if someone has 6 months to live and palliative care is being reduced massively, hospice care is being reduced massively, it may cause people to make that jump a lot sooner because they feel pressured to do so. Am I right on that? I feel like you know more than me on that.
Yes, and I would like to say that in Canada, they have said that no other country has these numbers in terms of rate of growth after introducing assisting dying laws. The precipitous growth that we've had is unparalleled anywhere. The
Hmm.
numbers have gone through the roof and they're not what they expected. So that shows that there's something wrong with the boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. I think they are saying that the bill is going to be introduced on the 16th of October, or on the week of the 16th of October, and they don't have a full view of what that's going to look like just yet. But it does. I think we probably all have an element of skepticism when it comes to West Streeting as well, being the one to roll this kind of thing out.
I mean, there was a report on this that came out very recently, and they did say that not enough patients were consulted in the report, and that is one of the main report findings.
Hmm. Well, yes, I think, thank you very much, Maya. I think that's, we'll go into a little bit more about the future of the NHS when we look into the torification side a little bit further down. But thank you very much for now. And we're going to jump into the next story. If you are like me and you're not fantastic at geography, this may be a lot of hearing about the Chagos Islands this week. The UK has agreed to give sovereignty of the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius, kind of. The government have announced this week that the UK will return sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius after decades of disputes that have included everything from the ICJ to the UK supposedly threatening Mauritius. However, it's been returned on one condition, that the UK-US military base on the atoll Diego Garcia is allowed to remain and operate for a minimum of 99 years. So in this statement on the decision, David Lammy said that this government inherited a situation where the long-term secure operation of the Diego Garcia military base was under threat, with contested sovereignty and ongoing legal challenges. Today's agreement secures this vital military base, underlined, for the future. It will strengthen our role in safeguarding global security, shut down any possibility of the Indian Ocean being used as a dangerous illegal migration route, underscore, to the UK, as well as guaranteeing our long-term relationship with Mauritius. Now, Tory leadership contenders are obviously having an absolute field day with this topic. I think Robert Jenrick said that it's ideologically driven. I think Tugendhat said that it will give China the chance to build a military base there. But when we look at Lammy's statement, it doesn't feel like it's part of something super charitable or ideological, dare I say woke. In fact, it feels a bit like he's kind of trying to find a silver lining. But then why have they done it? Well, it's very, very possible that this decision has a lot less to do with ideological goals, intention to undo the colonial harms of the past, and a little bit more to do with the fact that we were ordered to give the Chagos Islands back in 2019 by the International Court of Justice. It turns out we were occupying the Chagos Islands illegally. Before granting independence to Mauritius in 1968, Britain was found to have unlawfully separated it to form a new colony on the Chagos archipelago named the British Indian Ocean Territory. Of course, at the time, the UK dismissed these UN rulings and judgments, and they argued that the ICJ ruling was merely an advisory opinion. So, in order to lease Diego Garcia to the US military back then, the UK forcibly expelled between 1,500 and 2,000 Chagos Islanders. Working with the US, the UK government displaced the Chagosian population between 1967 and 1973, not only on Diego Garcia, but also Paros Panos and Salomon. But you guys can tell me if you think this sounds familiar. Based on the reports at the time, the UK falsely declared that Chagos had no permanent population, so that it would not have to report its colonial rule to the UN. But in reality, the Chagosian community had obviously lived on Chagos for centuries. Now, we've agreed to give it back as long as the military base is still allowed to operate for a minimum of 99 years. The decision has also drawn quite a lot of criticism from the Chagosian community, who have been displaced for decades. Chagosian Voices, a community organization for Chagosians based in the UK and several other countries where islanders have settled, deplored the exclusion of the Chagosian community from the negotiations. They said they were leaving them powerless and voiceless in determining our own future and the future of our homeland. The view of Chagosians, the indigenous inhabitants of the islands, have been consistently and deliberately ignored, and we demand full inclusion in the drafting of the treaty. Our government have also been criticised in the case of the Chagos Islands for the internment of Tamil asylum seekers on the island for years, which might be the illegal migration route that David Lammy was talking about there. Now, Maya, I saw this story yesterday, and I almost, when I first saw it, thought that the government were doing something out of a sense of duty to do the right thing. Is it skeptical? Is it skeptical of me to not think that that's the case anymore?
I don't know if it's maybe a growing pressure of how many UN resolutions we're not going along with at the moment that has made David Lammy go, the Tories were told this in 2019. I better start doing
We've got to do one at least. We've got to comply with one international law, right?
Yeah, but the UN's ruling was to give them all back, not give all but Diego Garcia back. And I will just say, you did miss a quote from James Cleverly, what he said at the Tory party conference that was incredibly insightful. He said, weak, weak, weak on David Lammy's decision. So a beautiful, nuanced point from Mr.
Thank you,
Cleverly.
James. He's always got those.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, insane that we're having this conversation and acting like giving them back is the end of the reparations or compensation. I've been reading a lot of people's accounts on what life was like when they were able to live there, and I've seen it described as a paradise by multiple different inhabitants, and that they've really painted this beautiful life where they just they made all of their own fishing boats, they just like lived off the land and ate so much seafood, and like the stories, the poems that they tell from this time period is just so beautiful, and it's just such a horrible reminder of US and UK global greediness, to say the least.
Yeah, it's we do seem to have a habit of telling people that nobody's living somewhere and then giving it to someone else. That seems maybe that's our thing. But there's a good, I think one of the messages in the chat here, it's worth almost to comply with some of the audit. It feels like replying to half an email. Now, just to say, they are technically giving back sovereignty of the entire area, but it's on the condition that the US UK military base is still allowed to exist and operate for 99 years. So I guess technically Mauritius will be ruling over it, but not that. It's an interesting one where they've given it back, but also you can't go anywhere near it, and it's a secretive military base, and we're in charge of it.
And they've described it as a 99-year lease, which, if we're going to be using the language of leasing something, I think we should all start acting I think the Chagosians should act a little bit more like UK landlords, and they should just call a no-fault eviction and terminate the contract early.
Yeah. I mean, it's also that base was used very heavily during the so-called War on Terror in 2003, and Mithril in the chat has mentioned a little bit like Guantanamo. It's not exactly like Guantanamo, but I will say the Tamil asylum seekers who have been kept in like temporary displacement camps there for 3 years now. There's been reports of attempted suicide. There's been reports of hunger strikes, including children, essentially because they have traveled to the island and attempted to claim asylum there. And rather than sending people on, I think this was also when there was a discussion about potentially sending these people over to Rwanda as well as part of a separate Rwanda plan. There's not been any news so far of what the UK government is planning on doing with those people. It's essentially just well, that's yours now. I'm going to send everyone in. We're just leaving that where it was. Like there's no work that's been undone realistically in this context.
No, and we know that by the 1900s, there were 426 families living on the archipelago. That's 426 families who were forcibly evicted. If you want to really do something good, well, they call it an evacuation, but I have a big issue with the word evacuation because it makes it look like it's some kind of natural disaster and that they were saved from something. And it wasn't. It was an eviction and then really human trafficking to different parts of the world. If they wanted to do something nice, then they should also rehouse those people on the archipelago and put in a community fund to make the communities as sustainable as they were back then. But also the Diego Garcia has been very important for things like the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. And I just don't see that the UK, with all the tensions from China, will ever give that back, regardless of 99 years.
No, it's interesting, and I think it ties into the Israel-Palestine dispute, discussion, conflict, occupation, where it's this with a lot of the rhetoric that we see around the return of colonial like land that's been colonized is we'll give back it, but some of it, and on our conditions and on our terms. So we'll return this island to you, but only if you let us continue to have our absolutely massive military base there. And only if you don't ask us any questions about it. And it's like, it's interesting that it continues to remain, it's on the terms of the colonizer, it will continue to be, but I don't know if we expected much more. It is disappointing to see that the Chagosian community overall found out about it via the media. They found out about it at the same time as the rest of us across like BBC News and things like that, especially when it's only a certain number of families who were displaced. Like, it's not like you're trying to gather hundreds of thousands of people together. It's yes, very frustrating. So I think we are gonna jump through onto, speaking of our kind of bloody colonial history, we are going to speak about Gaza. I know that there's been a lot of news today of new bombings, new attacks, new strikes being ordered across Yemen, across Lebanon. I want to speak briefly about the investigative documentary into Gaza that Al Jazeera released yesterday. I think it is available on YouTube. It's also available on the Al Jazeera website, compiling videos, photos from a database of the social media accounts of more than 2,000 IDF soldiers, documenting their own acts of violence, which more often than not includes war crimes in Gaza. The investigative unit for Al Jazeera, known as the I Unit, shared that they were originally expecting, when they started this process, a lot more work to go into identifying the perpetrators of these acts. They were looking at things like geolocation, how they were going to find the identifying features of the people who'd made these videos. But it turns out that this wasn't needed because, for the most part, the soldiers that were posting this material were posting it in their own names on publicly accessible platforms. They often gave details of when and where the incidents took place. I'm going to say now, before we get into it in too much detail, we're not going to be sharing clips from the documentary here, but we are going to share a few quotes from Al Jazeera's key findings describing some of the events that they saw in the footage. I do recommend everybody watches it. I think it's really important to watch, but as a warning for now, and also if you do go over and watch the documentary, it's going to be disturbing, and it is really upsetting. But here is a little bit of what the I Unit found. From the explainer linked to the video from the Al Jazeera investigative unit, they shared that the behavior displayed in the photos and videos that they found ranges from crass jokes and soldiers rifling through women's underwear drawers to what appears to be the outright murder of unarmed civilians. Most of the photos and videos fell into one of three categories. You had wanton destruction, you had the mistreatment of detainees, and you had the use of human shields. And all three of these may be violations of international humanitarian law and war crimes. In the documentary, Al Jazeera share this footage with a whole host of different people. They share it with international human rights lawyers. They share it with retired British Army generals. But one of the more common styles of content that they find within these, like, I think it's something like 2,500 sources, are of soldiers detonating buildings. As you can see in this photo, a lot of these videos show the soldiers themselves in the act. It looks like a group holiday photo or something. They're not worried about being identified. They're filming themselves committing war crimes. Like, they're not ashamed of it. But why would they be? In another part of the documentary, the team speak to witnesses about their experiences in the Strip. And one of the people interviewed, Abu Amr, says a soldier told his son that nothing prevents us from killing you. We could just kill you all. That's normal. No one will deter us, and no one will call us to account. And that's true, right? That's what our government and other governments have taught them. That's why they're happy to film like actual acts of torture and post it on their social media accounts. In one video, films a detainee being pulled from the back of a truck and says, "Look, I'm going to show you his back. You're going to laugh at this. He was tortured." Other videos and photos show the IDF using Palestinian civilians as human shields, forcing them to inspect empty buildings covered in blood whilst being monitored by a drone. Another part of the investigation shares that at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis in February, a young man was forced to act as a messenger by the Israelis, ordering displaced people to evacuate the building. And that man was then shot dead by a sniper in front of his mother. It's been almost a year since October 7th. There are hundreds of examples of videos, photos, testimonies of these crimes. Not only that, but they're being posted online by soldiers using their real names. Soldiers like Shalom Gilbert, a member of the 202 Paratroopers Battalion, who posted a video to social media showing 3 unarmed men being killed by snipers. We know that our government don't care, or that they don't want to look, because we've been seeing a lot of these videos for months. If you're like me, you'll have seen them on social media. You'll have seen them from Middle Eastern Eye. But the documentary also shared reports from Declassified UK highlighting just how keen we've been to participate in aiding this genocidal state. According to the report, the British have been running surveillance flights over Gaza from the Cyprus RAF base Akrotiri since early December, supposedly to facilitate the rescue of British Israeli captives, of which there were 2. But apparently there was up to 1,000 hours of surveillance footage captured by March. The planes that were being used for these flights do have target acquisition capability. Maya, who knows? Maybe we weren't using them for that, but where does this leave us when it comes to our knowledge or lack thereof of the war crimes that are being committed by Israel?
Well, I want to start by just going back to that clip that you spoke about the man who was shot in front of his mother. The most disturbing bit about his story was that, for me, was that he had been tortured previous to this. He was then taken back to Gaza and then told to go and tell people to evacuate, and that they had to leave. And he said to his mum, I've been telling you, you will need to leave. And that he was then told by the Israelis that he had to return to his captors, to the Israelis, after giving this message to his mother and the people she was sheltering with. Now, he, on the way back, when he was walking back, like, that's when the incident happened. But for me, it was absolutely devastating when he was tortured, like taken away, tortured, then put back, told to deliver the message, and then told to then come back to his captors, and then was shot. It was just horrific. I think it really showcased a institutional lack of discipline, a sense of rampant impunity. But for me, the whole documentary just felt like a package of evidence for prosecutors, but also for people in the UK and the US, because the UK and the US was really singled out in the documentary. That means that there's no plausible deniability. None of us can say we didn't know what was going on and what we were enabling by allowing us to continue to arm Israel, and also giving them diplomatic cover.
I mean, yeah, this was the thing, right? We're talking about, on the one hand, it's surveillance coverage. It was to return the captives, but in those 1,000 hours of footage that you filmed, you didn't notice. What did you think was happening? Were you looking away every time the indiscriminate bombing was happening? Did you not? Oh, that we didn't pick that part up. We were just specifically looking for hostage. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But the UK government did respond to this, apparently. So I just want to pull up our response. But according to the UK's government response to the I-Unit's investigation, they said, we've heard this before. They said the UK is not a participant in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. As a matter of principle, we only provide intelligence to our allies where we are satisfied that it will be used in accordance with international humanitarian law. Only information related to hostage rescue is passed over to the authorities. Now, I've seen news that's come out earlier today about the US government corresponding regarding concerns that the international law is being broken. We saw David Cameron dodging the question earlier in the year. We also found, was it Alison Pearson uncovered that we had received legal guidance not to engage in this. It's unbelievable that we're still feigning ignorance. Oh, well, we're not involved in this war. I don't really know. From my side, I feel like I don't know what we have to say about it anymore, because the strategy from the government is silence. But I don't know. How are you feeling on this now?
I mean, we're setting a precedent for the future. And if we want to kind of return how things were before October 7th, when this all comes out in the courts, the UK, the US, and Israel will all have to face the music. And, we will be looking at things like sanctions. Now, imagine the economic effect if, say, a country like China sanctioned us. That would destroy our economy. And I think that a lot of people really, there's this kind of Western exceptionalism where you just think like it's never going to come and bite us. Like
Yeah.
the rules-based order, it's not for us. We make the rules.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that none of this makes sense on paper. Israel is radicalizing the people of Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and Yemen, because when you torture hundreds of thousands of people, you are creating lifelong enemies. You are creating a hotbed for radicalization and for people to hate you. The only thing that makes sense is that Israel plans on being forever at war.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Jesus. You think about like the race riots in the UK the other week. It was because a girl was killed by someone who wasn't a asylum seeker, who wasn't a Muslim, and that turned into like the immediacy with which there are people in this country who are pushed to insane acts of violence that don't even they don't even connect in their heads to any kind of actual experience or trauma. We're talking about people getting shot in front of their mothers. On like a massive scale. That's like, I think, yeah, they said in the documentary they had 2,500 files that they found, and that's through social media accounts. That's what people are sharing. That's what these soldiers feel comfortable posting about on the internet, and it's just we've seen it. I don't have government surveillance. I haven't spent 1,000 hours flying over to see what's happening, and I've got a pretty strong idea of what's going on. It just feels completely rampant. I think we do have a couple of comments as well that we'll look through now. Biden should be sent that documentary. I mean, wasn't Biden saying the other day, nothing is going to happen today? I don't know what day he said that on, but I'm pretty sure quite a lot of bombing happened. The absence of accountability and a sense of impunity leads to monstrous acts, as we've all seen. I think that's Maya, what you were heading towards in that.
It also creates a kind of global security crisis because people aren't just going to hate Israel, they're going to hate the allies as well. So I actually only feel like there's going to be any major changes when the US and the UK feel those security impacts, when people want to punish us for the physical and democratic aid we've been supplying Israel.
And it does also make you think. I'm sure you've had this. I've had it plenty on social media. We get it on TikTok all the time. But talking about whenever you speak on Palestine, you have people say, well, Palestinians should be stopping Hamas. Like the civilians should be stopping Hamas. Or like, well, Palestine voted for, like Gaza voted for Hamas. And it's obviously, one, it's factually not true because of the average age of people in Gaza. But also, if we have, like our government is currently funding and supporting this and enabling this. I don't want to face the blame. I don't want to take the blame for not having stopped our government. But that's how people in the UK think about people in Gaza. This is the crisis that we're going to be heading towards. And it's very, very scary, but it's not kind of unexpected, is it? Sorry.
I do also think that it is way too kind of short-sighted for people to think that this is going to be something temporary that's going to just kind of blow over. You're blowing up people's lives. That is going to create generational trauma.
You have, it's something like in the last 8 years, the number of worldwide displaced people has gone up in the millions, and that doesn't include Palestinians because they're covered by a separate area. It's the UNRWA, right, as opposed to UNHCR. But we're talking about 2.1 million people being displaced.
And And I do think that people in the media, we are slightly handcuffed by how we can talk about this, because obviously Hamas and Hezbollah are prescribed organizations in the UK, and prevent referrals are going up. And I personally don't want a knock on my door, and I'm sure you don't want to either. But providing a balanced argument as to, yes, these are prescribed organizations, but they also run infrastructure in these countries. And, you know, terrorism is a point of view.
Yeah. I think that is something we always have to be aware of as on the Turn Left channel, is that we are fully aware that we are online. And as a result, there are certain opinions that we may have, we may not have. That's it. I think I do want to just flag on here from Mithril has said, I'm very glad I'm not on anti-social media anymore. My mental health is a bit fragile as is. I really strongly recommend that people do watch the documentary. However, I really want to give people a warning. We've seen a lot of really, really horrific things over the last year, and before, but especially in the case of Palestine. And I do think it's important to see this stuff. It's important also, though, to protect yourself, because also activism is not effective when you're tearing your own mental health down. We need to be able to sustain ourselves as individuals. We need to be able to bolster ourselves. And as a result, I do think that it's important to remember to give yourself the space to be able to sustain this, as opposed to falling over into kind of a doom spiral or anything like that.
I do think there are some ways you can be more sensitive when you consume this sort of media. So I think if you do really want to watch it, you can watch it and use it as a more of a podcast, and don't look at the video of it. You get enough of the audio. Personally, one of my worst bits of the documentary was somebody's testimony where they just described what had happened to them. So you have to be careful with that sort of thing. But I'm sure the transcript will be available soon online of the whole thing. And if not, if you go to like some trusted news sources, I'm sure you'll be able to read loads of different reviews. And if you read enough reviews, you might be able to get a good enough picture without having to sit through it.
Yeah, I think they do have Al Jazeera have a explainer of like all of the key findings as well, which they share with the video. I think if we can, I'll ask if we can drop it in the chat. If not, we'll make sure to share it immediately after the live over on the Twitter as well. I believe it's called "What Did Al Jazeera's Investigation into Israeli War Crimes Reveal?" But if we can share that link. If we can't share it because of YouTube's rules, we'll post it very shortly after. Thank you very much for that, Maya. I appreciate it. It is a really, really heavy topic. But I think it's something that we owe it to people to see, or we owe it to people to be aware of. But yeah, I would recommend looking at the explainer, watching anything like that. Now, we do want to hear more from people in the chat as well as we go. I do want to say a thank you to Zeke the Beast. Middle name is, love that. Zeke the Beast. Thank you very much for the gifted memberships. That is massively appreciated. Thank you for any gifters, any members, anyone who joins to support. And of course, if you are enjoying tuning into these lives, please do go ahead and support Turn Left by hitting the subscribe button. Middle East Eye is worth a look from my perspective. It's something they actually posted a compilation video recently of all of the different of a selection of these videos that they had found. I think it was a few months back, of just blatant war crimes being committed by the IDF. So I would recommend that as well. Feels like we're living in the factors leading up to section of history titled "Breakdown International Rule and International Law." Maya, I will bring you back for this, because it feels like we're living through a hell of a lot of history at the moment. There's one thing that I've talked about a bit before, which is hindsight bias, which is the idea that after something's happened, people go, "Oh, of course, it was always going to happen." And one of the big dangers that we have with history repeating itself is that we like to make it seem as though it was never, it was a completely unique event. So every time we have a genocide, every time we have something like this, we go back and say, oh, it was specifically this group or these people or this thing. And actually, the factors are generally pretty much the same. I think that's what's really scary when you do know a little bit more about these topics.
I mean, I've always thought that the UK was really missing out on the sort of education that German children get, where they describe the factors and how it's slowly built to dehumanize a population to that degree. And I could just see some very interesting history books in the future about how the Israelis have managed to get to this stage of dehumanization, human animals, mowing the lawn, and so proud. It's not just an issue with Benjamin Netanyahu. There are many people in the war cabinet, and especially in the documentary, they show concerts of people jumping around screaming, "We want your villages to burn. We're going to burn your villages."
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's not that rare for humans to do this kind of thing. Not another fucking referendum. I think that may be one from a little bit earlier on in this show. But we will jump over into the last story of tonight, I think. I've just dropped the link in the chat for anyone who does want to see the explainer as well from Al Jazeera. Before we go into the last story, I do want to say there is a lot of news happening. It's been really hard actually keeping up today in terms of just the sheer amount of bombing that Israel's doing, the amount of strikes the UK is ordering. We want to be able to cover as much of this as we can. We'll cover quite a lot in the debrief on Sunday, and there's a little bit more of an option for you to kind of share your thoughts there as well, also suggesting things that you want us to talk about. But if you want us to have the capacity to do more shows, cover more stories, be more on it in terms of posting clips on socials or anything like that, then you can help us grow the platform by supporting us over at turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. Over there, you can either support us monthly, one-off donation, any amount is an incredible help, and it's a step towards becoming a full-time media organisation. So thank you in advance. Now, we're going to come into the last topic for tonight. The Conservatives at this week's party conference praising Wes Streeting and his plans for the NHS. Fantastic. This week's gathering of the Conservative Party's brightest and boldest saw a number of Conservative MPs praising the work of our man Wes, which, whilst not surprising, is a little bit worrying again. This week, the Tory MP for Mid Norfolk, George Freeman, was asked his thoughts on Streeting's plans at a fringe conference around life sciences. He said, the new government have made it very clear that there's a lot of continuity. I'm pretty cheered. So that's great. I'm talking to Keir and Peter Kyle and others. They have been kind enough to say that this is one of the areas they don't view as part of the broken inheritance. Maya, I personally feel loads better knowing that George, the Tory MP, feels that there's loads of continuity from the Tory government to the Labour government. On a scale of 1 to change, is this the change that you were hoping for?
No, but I didn't have a lot of hope with Labour having the NHS because it was actually under the Blair administration where they first started to privatise areas of the NHS. They started with cleaning services. And yes, the NHS was the best in the world at 2010. And so, it looks like, okay, we'll go back to the same party. We'll go back there. But unfortunately, when you look at the stuff that comes out of Wes Streeting's mouth, it is not it. It is not what we are looking for. He seems to think that we can tinker around the edges and we can just tech our way out of the NHS crisis. It's not groundbreaking to say that we should not be working on a half analog, half digital NHS when most primary care is also mostly analog still. So it's not like a breaking news thing to think that digitalizing the NHS services will make things more efficient. Yes.
I just thought about that. Have we considered the internet?
We're doing carrier pigeon at the moment, maybe in 10 years.
Damn it, he's just innovating. He just doesn't stop innovating, this guy.
I know, exactly. I mean, the issues with the NHS are workers' rights, retention and recruitment, the fact that hospitals are crumbling, and generally, if you're talking about public health, only 20% of the public's health is determined by healthcare. The 80% is affected by wider determinants, which we call the social determinants of health. So it's things like housing, it's environmental factors. Do you live near a motorway? Do you live near like those sort of things? If you really want to tackle NHS waiting lists, if you really want to tackle the crisis in social care, you need to look at all the factors that are making people unwell. Stress is one of the primary causes of avoidable illness. Well, let's think about what causes stress. Like, if you actually want to solve the issues with the NHS, you need to look at these sort of things. And I don't think anybody's ready for the conversation of how do we stop the population being so stressed, because people immediately think, that means a worse economy. No, less stress workers mean less sick days, more productive workers. So healthy people, healthy lives, productive workers, growth of GDP.
I think Wes on his own has messed with my blood pressure.
If he has one hater, it is me.
He's just...
I honestly, there's nothing that makes me more frothing than Wes Streeting. And, there are multiple factors why, but also, the rampant transphobia that just constantly gushes from his mouth. Like, you can't talk about having trans women on wards and wanting to have like single sex wards if there are not enough wards for patients and patients are in the corridor. You know who's not getting a single sex ward? All the patients who are in the corridors.
Yeah.
All the patients who are in that hospital, in the ambulances outside.
That would be so Wes, though, to be like single sex corridors.
Yeah, it would
single
be.
Sex there is a there is a good comment from Charlotte in the chat saying, to be fair, tech done badly is worse than no tech, and we've been burned in the UK by test and trace. Based on Wes's recent paying for admission into Parliament, people talking mates rates and things like that with his outstanding businessman friends. It does. I am a little bit wary of him potentially not driving the most successful innovation, maybe not bringing on the best people for the job when it comes to trying to digitize the NHS.
Or also that he has accepted record amounts of donations from private health companies.
Yes.
And also, do you remember Palantir, who bought our data?
I forgot about Palantir.
This is like my special subject. So
I always forget about Palantir. And Brandox. Brandox are still doing stuff. I've seen them.
Yes. And generally, when it comes to all things in the UK, all roads when it comes to privatisation lead back to Serco. So there's lots of layers to it. He seems to think that the private sector can unlock some kind of capacity, which is exactly what the Tories did. But I just want to make the really firm point that the private sector does not have the answers. The private sector doesn't have an A&E. They poach all of the healthcare workers that are trained publicly. There's never going to be if you run a health service, a for-profit model is never going to be better than a not-for-profit model. You need all of the resources to go back in. Like, the last time I felt patriotic was during the Olympic opening ceremonies, where we showed the creation of the NHS, because I think it's the most incredible thing in the world. And so to see that amazing idea that genuinely came out of this decade of national renewal rhetoric that has come out of Starmer's mouth, which is meant to be mirroring what happened after the Second World War, you need to have a fully socialized medical system where you need to increase the capacity. Outsourcing things to the private sector that charge you twice as much for not the same standard of job is not going to help. If you give birth privately and you have a complication during labor, you're taken to an NHS hospital.
Yeah.
So the private sector get all the easy things, and the NHS get lumbered with all the complicated things. So yeah, the answer is in bringing it all back in-house, paying people the same amount that they would get in the private sector to genuinely be competitive, restoring the crumbling infrastructure of the NHS hospitals, and then really investing in prevention.
Yeah, it's always scary when when Tori talks about continuity. It's interesting that a lot of the language that we're hearing now around the NHS is not private, it's not funding, it's not economic language, but it's entrepreneurial language that we're seeing a lot of: innovation, competition, dynamic. Like it's almost all of the phrases that you hear on like a job ad when it definitely means that job's going to exploit you. Like, you need to be fast paced, dynamic growth, fast moving environment, balance a lot of wear a lot of hats. It feels like there's a lot of that going on in the wording that we're seeing at the moment, which will essentially, as it does with these job ads, kind of just boil back down to having a really incompetent boss and a really unfair amount of expectation placed on you.
And Robert Jenrick is a big fan of Wes Streeting, which that should just be the review. Like, that should just be all that we need to know, is if he's endorsed by Robert Jenrick, it's not a good thing.
Who's in like a competition to be the worst guy.
Yeah.
He's just trying to win the worst guy award. Robert Thatcher Jenrick at the moment.
Who's always too busy because he's painting over murals so that nobody actually feels welcome.
What are you going to do, Maya?
We need the adults back in the room, and we are the adults.
We need the adults out the room. Get them out of this room. They're keeping coming into the room and being really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of good comments for us to look at here as well. In terms of some of these are serious and helpful, and a couple of them are a little bit silly. We've had Ali say, as though delayed train wasn't stressing me out enough. Now we're talking about that cokehead. When it comes to that, we've got Frank Hester owns System 1, which is the most commonly used GP software. For anyone who can't remember, is Frank Hester the one who said that he thinks Diane Abbott should be shot? Yep, that's Frank. Fantastic. We have then also a good comment here from Flow Snake. I think that's the idea. They flood the zone with disasters, crap, dead cats, in the hope that we'll forget about things like Palantir.
Yes. I mean, we should all be disgusted that it's been 5 years, probably about 5 years, I'm not exactly sure, where we have had the Safe Staffing Saves Lives posters all over the hospitals. Safe staffing obviously saves lives, but it also protects healthcare workers. We have, like, the rate of suicide amongst healthcare workers in the UK is at an all-time high. It is I can't remember what the figure is, but it's at least one doctor every 2 weeks takes their own life. It's at least that, if not more. It's not just about pay. It's about making sure that our health service isn't actively traumatizing patients and the people who work there.
I think, yeah, one more comment in from Charlotte. I watched my Servo colleagues face the same danger as I did in COVID and get shafted if they got sick. There are so many NHS workers who have these stories of, especially during COVID, just being people are traumatized. These workers are completely traumatized. And what was the headline that you shared with me earlier today of people being asked to come back to work to make up hours?
Yeah. So they are now putting in, they want to station like the people who usually work at the job centre in hospitals because of people who are always on long-term sick. So I get the idea. They're like,
for the patients.
Yeah, they're like, oh, the long-term sick, where do they hang out? The hospital. That's where we put job coach. Are you serious? Do you know what people are doing at the hospital? Oh, yeah, I'll have my cancer treatment at 10 and then I'll pop to the job centre in the hospital at 3.
Just to cost... I didn't understand that story. I thought you were talking about for the staff. I didn't even realise that we were talking about shuffling over to the bedside of someone long-term sick.
Yeah, I had thought that as well. And then I looked at a few of them and I was like, oh, no. Oh, no, they mean the disabled.
That is absolutely horrifying news.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, no, you're too sick to get to the job centre. Ha.
I'll come to you.
Yeah, doesn't matter. I see you, we'll be there.
Scooching over to someone's bedside with like a little clipboard going, well, what are your skills, do you think?
Yeah.
Wake up.
Have you ever thought about working from home, maybe?
Oh my God. Well, and also, given the state of the current work health system that we do have, it's an absolute shit show anyway. So I feel like the message that we're seeing for a lot of what we're talking about today is really let's focus on fixing the existing things. Maybe before, let's try and get the bare minimum right before we try and progress to getting ourselves to the society where we feel like we can allow assisted dying. Maybe let's get the absolute minimum in for people.
Yeah.
Maybe let's give back the whole bit of colonized land.
And
instead
also
of
not like realizing that if people haven't got hope, they're much more likely to turn to something like assisted dying. And especially for people who are disabled and have complex chronic conditions, if you empower people and you support them properly, you can restore that hope. If you give them access to assisted dying, they might not have the chance and there might not be the resources to try and rekindle that hope. And we just don't, it's not a place we want to be.
Yeah. Maybe the time isn't now for that. Thank you so much, Maya. I'm aware that we are slightly over time. So I want to thank you so much again for joining us tonight. I want to let everybody know you can find both myself and Maya on TikTok at the handles that are on the screen. If you enjoyed the live show, quick question from Flow Snake. Are you on any platforms other than TikTok? Or are you full TikTok?
I am full TikTok apart from LinkedIn.
You can catch Maya on LinkedIn. And
probably
not. Yeah. You can catch Maya over on LinkedIn or you can catch her on TikTok. I do think I've seen a couple of people in the chat recently say that they don't have TikTok. I personally think that's absolutely ridiculous of you because you could just get it and just follow me and Maya and turn left and you'd be fine. You wouldn't have any rubbish coming up on your feed. But yes, if you enjoyed the live show as well, please go ahead, support Turn Left, hit the subscribe button, go over to TikTok, follow Maya, give some support. And remember, thank you so much again, Maya. Remember, there is a lot of news happening. It's happening all the time. If you want us to cover it, you can help us grow this platform. You can support us on Patreon. You can subscribe. You can even just share our videos on TikTok and help boost us up in the algorithm. For more information about ways to contribute, you can visit turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. And if you want to hear more from us this week, don't forget to switch your notifications on for our Sunday debrief on the weekend. I have been Sneakrcet. It has been lovely to see you all today, and I shall see you soon.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.